Alright, hello and welcome to the second video of this series on how to use the TI nSpire. In this video, we'll cover some basic operations, just your basic like for functions, how to use fractions, exponents, roots, how to use pi, all that kind of stuff. So let's go ahead and just get started. So hopefully you've experimented with your calculator just a little bit and uh, you found out how to use some of your things, how to use some of these operations already. So if I want to find 3 plus 6, this is pretty much how it is on every other calculator, unless you've used like an RPN calculator, of course. 3 plus 6, you click enter. Enter is our button that we use instead of equals. If we want to do 6 minus 3, once again, nothing crazy. 5 times 6 gives you 30. Division is the one where it gets a little bit weird. There's actually two ways to input division. You can either do, for example, 81 divided by 3, like that. Or you can use your fraction bar, which you get by doing control divide, and then you can actually set up like this. Right, so there's two ways to do division. You can either just use the regular divide sign, or you can use a fraction bar. Fraction bars I think are better if you're trying to like group things together. Like if you have an expression in your numerator and an expression in your denominator, for example, I think it works better in that case. But the other thing with division is notice here I've purposely set it up so that these output as whole numbers. But let's say I wanted to find like 6 or 5 divided by 6, right? And I have it set up like this. If I click enter, it kind of just outputs the fraction. Like, okay, 5 divided by 6 is 5/6, right? I mean, obviously. But what if I want this as a decimal? Well, if I want this as a decimal, all I have to do is instead of clicking enter, I will click control enter. And in fact, if I've already typed this in, like if I've typed 5/6 and I'm like, oh, like dang it, I meant to find the decimal part, I don't actually have to retype this whole thing. I can actually just do control enter and it'll take it from there. Right? I don't have to retype everything. So that's the big thing with fractions. Be careful between your exact and your between your fraction and your decimal. If you want a decimal, all you have to do is click control enter. Now for exponents, and before we go to exponents, I'm just going to say that I've only been going for a few minutes, and you see I've kind of racked up a lot of history here. And if you get too much history, eventually your calculator will start to become slower because it's having to hold all this information and then create new information. So if I click, if I want to clear this history, I can go to menu, and then number 1 is actions, and then number 5 is for clear history. And see, all of it goes away now. And I'm running this on my computer, so it's not really having that much of a difference. But if you do it enough on your regular calculator, on your handheld, then you'll start noticing a difference after a while. All right, so if we want to do exponents, say I want to find 5 squared, I'll just type a 5, and then you see this button right here is where we go to square things. So I just click that button, click enter, and we get 25. Of course, you might want to have different exponents. So let's say we're trying to find 6 cubed. So I would type 6, and then right next to the x squared, I have this caret button. So I'll click that, and then 3 for 6 cubed. Kind of on the flip side of that, we have like our roots. So if I want to find the square root of 49, I'll click enter, and of course that just gives me 7. A little bit of an extension of that is, let's say I was trying to find like the square root of 18. If I just click enter, something I like about this calculator is that it'll actually simplify these radicals for you. So square root of 18, it'll simplify it to 3 times the square root of 2. But of course, maybe you don't want it in this form. Maybe you just want it in decimal form. If you control enter, it will give you the decimal form. Okay, now for higher powers, or for higher roots, let's say I want to find the cube root of 64. I would type a 3 right there, and then 64 under the cubed root in the radicand, enter, and of course that outputs 4. So next we'll move on to like exponentials and logarithms. So the two main exponentials that you're going to use during the test are the 10 to the x and e to the x keys. So before I go to that, I'm going to clear all of my memory. So I'll go to actions and then 5 for clear history. So of course, if I want to find like 10 to the 5th, I'll click this button right here to the 5th power. Nothing too complicated. And then if I want like e to the 5th, I'll click this e to the x button, click 5. And this won't actually simplify if you just click enter, but of course it will show you the decimal part if you just click control enter. Alright, and then now for logarithms, right, kind of on the flip side of this, let's say I wanted to find like log base 6 of 36. So right above my 10 to the x, you can see this log key. So if I wanted to find log base 6 of 36, you really just type it in like how you would write it on a piece of paper, right? Log base 6 of 36, and I get 2. One little shortcut about this is, let's say I want to just find the log base 10 of like 1,000. If you leave the base part blank, it'll actually assume log base 10. So if I just leave it like this, if I want to find log base 10 of 100, that'll just give me 2. You see how it like automatically filled in that 10? If you leave it blank, it'll assume that you need 10. And then, very, very, very similar, we have the natural log. Let's say I wanted to find the natural log of like 50. I clicked enter, it just gave me that exact value. If I click control enter, of course it'll give me the decimal value. Alright, what is next? Next we have just our constants. So I'm gonna clear my page, menu 1, 5. We have our constants. So we want to find out, we want to find things like pi and e, and then the imaginary number, even infinity. We go to this number, we go to this button down here. So I click that and it opens up this menu. Most of the stuff in the bottom you're not going to use too often, but it's the stuff in this top one that you'll be using a lot more frequently. So of course, you hover over whichever constant you want, and you click enter. And then, I think for pi, if you just click enter, yes. If you just click enter, it will just give you the exact pi. And then if you do control enter, it'll show you the 3.14159. And then same kind of deal for e. If I could just type e, it'll give me the exact value. If I do control enter, it will give me the decimal value. I, of course, is the imaginary number. If I want to raise this to like the 4th power, oh, my bad. Which is something you often see with imaginary numbers. You want to raise them to powers. To the 4th just gives you 1. What else do we have? One thing to say about I is that if you want to use the imaginary number, you actually have to go to this setup. If you just type I like on your keyboard, it may look similar, but you see how it's not bolded? That's how you know there's not a value stored in it. So it'll just treat this like a variable. So like if I do I to the 4th, notice it just treats it like a variable, like I to the 4th. What else do we have? We have infinity. You'll be using this a decent amount, like whenever you're trying to do limit calculations, for those of you that have done calculus. And then theta isn't really a constant. I'm not really sure why they put it here, but you use this like whenever you're trying to graph like polar equations, for instance, and you need to have theta in your equation. So I get that theta. So it doesn't store a value. It's just what you would use for your polar equations. Okay, next up we have our trig functions. Okay, so if I go to trig, this is where all of our trig equations are going to live. So let's say I want to find the cosine of just pi. Right? I would go here, click pi, and boom, you get -1. Let's say I want to find the inverse tangent of 1/2. Type that in. If I just click enter, it gives me that. If I do control enter, you can see it'll give me the decimal value. So I like to just get in the habit of doing control enter for pretty much everything, just because like you've seen that that a lot of times you'll click enter and it'll just give you the exact same thing back, which isn't very helpful. So I would start getting into the habit of just typing control enter for pretty much everything. Pretty much everything. Okay, so that's trig. And then the last thing I want to go over is using the answer key. So let's say that I have just done like a geometry problem. And in this geometry problem, I had to calculate like the inverse tangent of 1/2. And now I want to raise this to like the 5th power. I'm not sure why you would want to do this, but just for the sake of argument. So you have two options here. Or actually 3, but most people only consider the first 2. I can type out this full number, 0.463647609, and then raise it to the 5th power. And that'll give me a pretty close answer. That'll be close enough that if I was worried about being off by the 3rd sig fig on calculator, that I would be covered. The other thing that people will do is just try to guesstimate how many decimal places they need. So maybe they'll just do like 0.464, raise this to the 5th power. And you can see we just barely had enough. So our answer would actually be 0.0214. If I do this, you get 0.0215. So you got to be careful, because if you round too much, eventually you'll get off in that 3rd significant digit, and then you'll get the question wrong, even if you've done all your calculations correctly. The third option, which is both more accurate and faster, so I'm going to re-enter this. The other option, which is both more accurate and faster, is to just take, if I could take this exact value by doing control and answer. And if I raise this to the 5th power, you see it actually uses more decimal places than I even had up here. Yeah, it actually uses more decimal places. So it's both quicker and more precise, more accurate. Some of these buttons will just fill in the answer as you go. So what I mean by that is, let's say I want to take this answer I got here and multiply it by 5. Instead of doing control answer and then times 5, if I just click times, you see it'll fill in this answer. It'll assume, well, if you want to multiply it by something, you want to multiply it by this most recent number. So if I do answer times 5, you see it'll give me that. There's a couple things this works for. Off the top of my head, it works for plus, minus, times, divide. It works like if you're trying to do if you're trying to square it like that. You see how it fills in the squared automatically. It'll also work for powers, I'm pretty sure. So if I just click this button, right, I want to raise this to the, the 1/2 power, right? Just by clicking that button, it already fills in the answer. It doesn't work for things like e to the x and 10 to the x. It doesn't work for like stuff like trig, but for those ones, it does work. And if you use that shortcut enough times over the course of a test, you're going to end up saving a lot of time. So something that you're going to want to get used to, something you're going to want to get more comfortable with. The other thing it's not as quick, but it is still relatively fast, is let's say you were trying to find the sign of a number, but it's not our most recent one. Let's say I want to find the sign of like this number all the way up here, right? I want to find the sign of this number all the way up here. Well, obviously I can't use answer, because if I use answer, it would use this value. So you have two options. One, I can just scroll up here using my up arrow and then click enter, and you see it moves it down there. And of course that would give me the answer. In more complex scenarios, sometimes that won't work, and you'll come across this as you do more and more questions. Sometimes this won't work. So what you can do is, and you have to judge for yourself whether or not this is quicker than just typing out the number. So I can scroll up here, and then the same way you would just on your computer, I can actually do Control-C to copy that number, come back down here, and click Control-V, and it's actually copied that number exactly. So it's up to you whether or not that's faster than just typing it all out. I mean, for some people it will be faster. For some people, Um, for some people, it's faster to just type it out. I found that it was just easier to type it out, but I thought that I would include it in this video just in case. All right, so that's about it for just your essential operations. Hopefully, you've learned something. If you have, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. More of these videos will be coming out soon, so make sure to check those out for some of your more advanced techniques that'll really help your speed on these calculator and math tests. So, once again, hope you learned something, and I will see you next time.